300 elite guards ran. One human didn't. The first thing Ethan Walker noticed was the sound. Not alarms. Not engines. Silence. A strange, heavy silence that settled over the frozen valley like fresh snow. The wind moved across the shattered landing field with a low whistle, pushing fine crystals of ice against twisted metal and abandoned equipment. Red emergency lights blinked somewhere beneath the drifting snow, their glow fading in and out like a dying heartbeat. Ethan opened his eyes and stared at a gray sky filled with racing clouds. For a moment he couldn't remember where he was. Then the cold found him. His combat suit immediately flashed warnings across the inside of his visor. External temperature, minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit. Atmospheric stability, deteriorating. Rescue channels, unavailable. He slowly sat up. Every joint complained. Frost coated one shoulder of his armor. A thin layer of snow had gathered across his chest while he lay unconscious. Around him, the royal convoy was gone. Transport carriers. Security vehicles. Supply shuttles. Most of them had already vanished into the storm. The landing zone that had held hundreds of personnel less than an hour ago now looked abandoned. Ethan removed his helmet and took a slow breath. The air smelled like ice, scorched circuits, and distant ozone. "That's not good," he muttered. His voice disappeared into the wind. He stood and scanned the valley. The Aurelian Royal Guard had been considered one of the most disciplined military organizations in known space. Thousands of worlds respected them, feared them, trusted them. Yet now there was no sign of them. No patrols. No rescue teams. Nothing. Only tracks. Hundreds of tracks leading away from the crash site. Ethan frowned. Something about that bothered him. Guards weren't supposed to leave. Especially not royal guards. Especially not during an emergency. A sharp tone sounded from his wrist scanner. Movement detected. 80 yards east. Ethan immediately turned. Snow drifted across the frozen ground in swirling waves. At first he saw nothing. Then a shape appeared through the white haze. A person. Alone. Moving slowly. Stumbling. Ethan started forward. As the distance closed, the details became clearer. Long silver hair whipped through the storm. A dark ceremonial cloak dragged through the snow. A figure tall and graceful even under exhaustion. Ethan stopped. There was no mistaking her. Queen Lysara of the Aurelian Empire. Ruler of 17 star systems. The most protected woman in this quadrant of the galaxy. And she was completely alone. Lysara saw him at the same moment. Her violet eyes narrowed immediately. Human. The word carried equal parts relief and suspicion. Ethan approached carefully. Your Majesty. Her gaze moved past him. Searching. Looking for someone else. Anyone else. Where is my escort? Ethan didn't answer immediately. Because he already knew the answer. They were gone. Lysara seemed to realize it herself. Her expression hardened. The guards. She looked across the empty valley. Where are they? The wind answered for him. Neither spoke for several seconds. Snow gathered on the Queen's shoulders. Somewhere in the distance, a damaged communications tower collapsed with a metallic groan. Finally Ethan said quietly, I think they left. The Queen stared at him. Impossible. Ethan wished she was right. He pointed toward the horizon. Hundreds of tracks stretched across the snowfield before disappearing into the storm. Lysara followed his gesture. Her face remained perfectly composed. Royal. Controlled. But Ethan saw the change in her eyes. The disbelief. The confusion. The realization. For the first time in her life, Queen Lysara had been abandoned. She took several slow steps forward. Then stopped. The vast frozen valley reflected in her violet eyes. Empty. Silent. Gone. Ethan looked away, giving her a moment. He wasn't royalty. He wasn't a diplomat. He wasn't even supposed to be here. He was just a human security specialist assigned to a routine escort contract. Yet somehow he had become the last person standing beside the Queen. His scanner beeped again. New weather warning. Visibility decreasing. Storm intensity rising. Estimated survival time without shelter, 6 hours. Ethan looked at the approaching wall of snow. Then at the Queen. Then back toward the endless white horizon. They needed shelter. Soon. Lysara finally spoke. Her voice was calm, but quieter now. Why would they leave? Ethan didn't know. Maybe fear. Maybe panic. Maybe something worse. But none of those answers would help right now. He placed his helmet back on and sealed it with a hiss. We can figure that out later. The Queen looked at him. Later? Ethan adjusted the rifle slung across his back and checked the power level on his suit. 43%. Not ideal. Not terrible. Then he met her gaze. First, we survive the next 6 hours. Another gust swept across the valley. Snow raced between them like white smoke. Lysara looked once more toward the distant tracks disappearing into the storm. Then she slowly turned back toward the lone human soldier. In that moment, with an empire absent and a queen forgotten, only one person remained beside her. And he had no intention of leaving. The storm arrived faster than Ethan expected. 1 minute the frozen valley was visible for miles. The next, the world had shrunk to a swirling wall of white. Snow hissed across his armor. Wind hammered against every exposed surface. Visibility dropped to less than 30 feet. Ethan adjusted the scanner mounted on his forearm and frowned at the readings. The weather system was growing stronger by the minute. If they stayed in the open much longer, finding shelter would become impossible. Queen Lysara stood motionless beside him, her silver hair whipping through the gale. Despite the storm, she maintained the posture of someone who had spent her entire life surrounded by ceremony and authority. Her shoulders remained straight. Her expression remained composed. Yet Ethan could see exhaustion beginning to creep beneath the surface. The Queen had never been meant to cross a frozen wasteland on foot. We need to move, Ethan said. Lysara looked toward the empty horizon. Toward where? Ethan tapped his scanner. A blinking marker appeared on the display. There is something about 2 miles north. Could be a mining station. Could be an old weather outpost. I do not know. But it is the only structure still showing a power signature. The Queen studied him for a moment. And if it is abandoned? Then it still has walls. A faint smile touched one corner of her mouth before disappearing. Very well, human. Together they started walking. The snowfield stretched endlessly ahead. Ice crunched beneath their boots. The wind never stopped. It howled through broken rock formations and frozen ridges like some enormous creature calling across the wilderness. Ethan led the way, constantly checking his scanner. Every few minutes he glanced back to make sure Lysara was still following. She never complained. Never slowed. But the storm was taking its toll. After nearly an hour, they reached a field of jagged black stones protruding from the snow. The rocks offered temporary protection from the wind. Ethan motioned for a short stop. He removed a thermal pack from his equipment pouch and activated it. Soft heat immediately spread through the compact device. He handed it toward the Queen. Lysara looked down at it. Then at him. What is this? Portable heat source. You need it as much as I do. Ethan shrugged. I grew up in Minnesota. The Queen tilted her head slightly. I do not know what that means. It means cold weather and I are old enemies. For the first time since the crash, an actual laugh escaped her. It was brief. Quiet. Almost lost beneath the wind. But it was real. Ethan found himself smiling despite the circumstances. They continued onward. As the hours passed, the landscape grew stranger. Towering formations of blue ice rose from the snow like frozen cathedrals. Massive cracks split the ground, glowing faintly from geothermal activity deep below the surface. The entire world felt ancient. Untouched. Lonely. Eventually Lasara broke the silence. You are not what I expected. Ethan kept his eyes on the scanner. That makes two of us. Human soldiers are often described as aggressive. Sometimes. Reckless. Occasionally. Difficult to command. Ethan nodded. That one is definitely true. Another faint smile appeared on her face. Then it vanished as quickly as it came. Yet you stayed. Ethan already knew what she meant. He had been thinking about it himself. Hundreds of guards. Advanced vehicles. Escape routes. They had all left. He was still trying to understand why. Someone had to. No, Lasara said quietly. They did not. The words lingered between them. Ethan did not answer. Because he was not entirely sure himself. Maybe it was duty. Maybe stubbornness. Maybe something deeper. Whatever the reason, leaving had never truly felt like an option. A warning tone suddenly sounded from his scanner. Ethan froze. New signal detected. Weak energy source. Less than half a mile away. His pulse quickened. Shelter. He increased his pace. The Queen followed. Snow continued falling heavily around them. Then, through the storm, a shape slowly emerged. At first it looked like another rock formation. Then the outline sharpened. Angular walls. Antenna towers. Reinforced doors buried beneath years of ice and snow. A structure. Real. Solid. Human-made by the look of it. Relief washed through Ethan. There it is. Lasara stared at the distant building. You sound surprised. I am. The outpost sat alone against the frozen landscape, partially buried but still standing. A faint amber light glowed behind one of the frosted windows. Somewhere inside, power remained active. Which meant heat. Shelter. Maybe communications. Maybe answers. Ethan started forward again. But before either of them could take another step, a new symbol appeared on his scanner. Then another. Then 3 more. Multiple energy readings. Moving. Approaching from the east. Ethan's expression immediately hardened. Lasara noticed the change. What is it? He looked toward the swirling wall of snow beyond the ridgeline. The contacts were still distant. Still hidden. But they were moving directly toward the outpost. And toward them. Ethan slowly lowered his scanner. Looks like we are not the only ones heading there. The approaching signals moved steadily across Ethan's scanner. Not fast. Not slow. Deliberate. The blinking markers crossed the frozen terrain in a straight line toward the outpost ahead. Snow continued falling in thick waves, reducing visibility to little more than shifting shadows and pale light. Ethan narrowed his eyes and adjusted the scanner's range. 5 contacts. No identification codes. No active communications. No registered transponders. That alone was enough to make him uneasy. Beside him, Queen Lasara studied his expression. You know who they are? Ethan shook his head. No. Do you know what they want? Not yet. The Queen glanced toward the distant structure. Its faint amber glow flickered through the storm like a lighthouse on a frozen sea. It was the only shelter for miles. If strangers were moving toward it, they would eventually meet. Ethan considered their options. There were not many. The temperature continued dropping. Night was approaching. Standing outside was no longer a realistic choice. We keep moving, he said. Lasara looked toward the approaching signals one last time before nodding. Together they resumed their trek. The final half-mile felt longer than the previous 2. Snow piled around their boots. Wind rattled loose pieces of metal protruding from the frozen ground. Every few minutes Ethan checked the scanner. The contacts continued advancing. Closer now. Still hidden behind the storm. Still impossible to identify. Eventually they reached the outpost. Up close, it looked older than Ethan had expected. Layers of ice coated the outer walls. Half of the communications tower leaned at an angle against the wind. Faded markings across the structure suggested it had once belonged to an exploration division decades ago. Most facilities like this had been abandoned long ago. Yet power still flowed somewhere inside. Ethan climbed a short flight of snow-covered steps and approached the main entrance. A thick reinforced door blocked the way. He brushed away frost from a nearby control panel. Surprisingly, a faint green light still glowed beneath the ice. "Well," Ethan said quietly. "That is promising." He pressed the activation pad. Nothing happened. He pressed it again. Silence. The wind howled around them. Ethan sighed. It was worth a try. Lysara stepped closer. Her violet eyes examined the panel carefully. "Move aside." Ethan did. The Queen placed one slender hand against the frozen surface. Soft blue light spread beneath her fingertips. Delicate patterns shimmered across the metal. Ancient systems buried beneath decades of ice suddenly awakened. Deep within the structure, machinery groaned to life. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "That is a useful trick." The Queen almost looked offended. "It is not a trick." A heavy mechanical sound echoed through the walls. Slowly, the door began sliding open. Warm air spilled outward into the storm. Not hot. Not comfortable. But warmer than outside. Much warmer. Ethan smiled. "Whatever you call it, I appreciate it." They stepped inside. The door closed behind them with a low rumble. Immediately the storm vanished. Silence filled the corridor. Dust floated through narrow beams of emergency lighting. The air smelled of old machinery and recycled oxygen. Somewhere far below, generators continued humming steadily. The outpost was alive. Barely. But alive. Ethan removed his helmet and looked around. Long hallways stretched into darkness. Ancient terminals lined the walls. Frost-coated corners where insulation had failed over the years. Yet compared to the frozen wasteland outside, it felt almost luxurious. Lysara slowly exhaled. For the first time since the crash, she looked relieved. Ethan noticed and pretended not to. People carried enough burdens without having every moment observed. He activated a portable lantern and started exploring. "Let us see what still works." They moved through several rooms. Storage compartments. Maintenance bays. Dormitories long since abandoned. Most equipment was useless. Some sections had collapsed entirely. But eventually they discovered a central operations room. A large circular chamber occupied the heart of the facility. Dim displays still flickered across a curved command console. A map of the surrounding region glowed faintly above a dusty holographic projector. More importantly, the room contained functioning heaters. Ethan immediately felt warmth returning to his hands. "Jackpot." Lysara studied the room. "You seem unusually optimistic for someone stranded on an ice planet." Ethan shrugged. "We have walls. Heat. Power. That qualifies as a good day." The Queen shook her head softly, almost amused. Ethan approached the main console and brushed away years of dust. Surprisingly, several systems responded. The station database slowly loaded. Emergency records appeared. Weather reports. Geological surveys. Supply inventories. Then another window flashed across the screen. Ethan froze. His expression immediately changed. Lysara noticed. "What is wrong?" Ethan stared at the display. The answer sat directly in front of him. Fresh transmission logs. Recent activity. Not decades old. Recent. Within the last 72 hours. Someone had been here. Very recently. His eyes moved across the records. Power adjustments. Security overrides. Communications requests. None of it should have existed. This station was supposed to be abandoned. Lysara stepped closer. "Human?" Ethan slowly looked up from the screen. "We are not the first visitors." Before the Queen could respond, a distant metallic sound echoed somewhere deeper inside the facility. Both of them immediately turned toward the dark hallway beyond the operations room. The sound came again. Faint. Rhythmic. Like footsteps moving through the station. And they were definitely not alone. The sound came again. Soft. Metallic. Measured. Ethan stood perfectly still beside the command console while the distant footsteps echoed through the old station. The heaters hummed quietly behind him. Dust drifted through beams of amber light. Somewhere deep within the structure, something was moving. Queen Lysara looked toward the dark corridor. Her expression remained composed, but Ethan noticed how her attention sharpened. Royal training, he thought. Calm on the surface. Calculating underneath. Ethan activated the lantern's lower brightness setting and moved toward the hallway. Stay close, he said. I am a queen, not a child. Good. Then you already know that walking into unknown situations alone is a bad idea. For a second, Lysara appeared ready to argue. Then another distant sound echoed through the station. She followed without another word. The corridor stretched nearly 100 feet before turning left. Frost covered the ceiling pipes. Emergency lights blinked slowly overhead. Their footsteps became the only sound. Ethan checked every doorway they passed. Most rooms were empty. Some still contained equipment covered by decades of dust. Others held old exploration vehicles and broken survey drones. Nothing explained the recent activity logs. Nothing explained the footsteps. Then they reached the source. The corridor opened into a large maintenance bay. Ethan stopped immediately. Someone was there. A small service robot rolled slowly across the floor. Its metal shell was scratched and faded with age. One wheel wobbled slightly as it moved. A maintenance light blinked on top of its chassis. The robot paused when it noticed them. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then the machine emitted a cheerful electronic tone. Station Maintenance Unit 7 operational, it announced. Welcome, visitors. Ethan exhaled. You have got to be kidding me. The robot rotated toward them. Statement not recognized. Lysara studied the machine carefully. This is what we were hearing? Apparently. Ethan lowered his shoulders. For the first time in hours, the tension eased slightly. The robot continued rolling closer. Current occupancy count 3. Ethan frowned. 3? The machine's sensor light flashed. Affirmative. Ethan and Lysara exchanged a look. There should have been only 2. The robot continued. Visitor 1. Human. Visitor 2. Aurelian Royal Designation confirmed. Visitor 3. Registered resident. Ethan felt his pulse rise again. Registered resident? The maintenance unit rotated toward a nearby doorway. Resident located in observation chamber. The station suddenly felt much less abandoned. Ethan followed the robot through another corridor and up a narrow staircase. Lysara remained beside him. Mather spoke. The observation chamber occupied the highest level of the outpost. Massive windows overlooked the frozen wilderness beyond. Snow struck the glass in white waves. At the center of the room sat a single figure. An elderly man. Human. Gray hair. Heavy winter coat. Reading a physical book beside a small heater. Ethan stared. The man slowly looked up over the edge of the pages. Well, he said calmly. That took longer than expected. Ethan blinked. You knew we were here? The station sensors knew. The old man closed the book. Same thing, really. Lysara stepped forward cautiously. Who are you? The man smiled. Name is Walter Hayes. Former planetary surveyor. Current caretaker of this frozen rock. Ethan looked around the room. There were signs someone had been living here for years. Shelves filled with books. Carefully maintained equipment. Fresh supplies. Handwritten notes. A coffee mug sitting beside the heater. It felt strangely normal. Comfortably human. Walter noticed Ethan's confusion. You expected monsters? Something like that. Sorry to disappoint you. He stood slowly and approached the window. Outside, the storm continued raging across the endless white landscape. You two picked an unfortunate week to visit. Ethan stepped closer. You know what happened at the landing site? Walter's expression changed. Not fear. Not surprise. Recognition. Like someone hearing a story they already understood. Yes, he said quietly. The room became still. Even the cheerful maintenance robot seemed silent. Lysara stared at him. Then tell us. Walter looked directly at the Queen. His eyes carried a sadness Ethan did not miss. Because the people who abandoned you were never running from the storm. Ethan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather outside. Walter turned toward the observation window. Far beyond the glass, through shifting curtains of snow, faint lights appeared on the horizon. Several lights. Moving. Approaching the station. The same contacts Ethan had seen earlier. Walter's voice remained calm. They were running from what is coming now. The lights beyond the observation window moved slowly through the storm. 5 distant points of white against an ocean of darkness and snow. Ethan stood beside the glass, watching them advance across the frozen landscape. Something about their steady pace unsettled him. They were not wandering. They knew exactly where they were going. Walter Hayes returned to his chair and picked up his coffee mug as if discussing approaching strangers during a planetary blizzard was an ordinary evening activity. The old surveyor stared into the steam rising from the cup. You should sit down, he said quietly. This conversation is easier that way. Neither Ethan nor Lysara moved. Walter sighed. Suit yourselves. The heater hummed softly beside him. Outside, the storm rattled against the reinforced windows. Inside, the room felt strangely warm. Safe. Almost peaceful. Which only made Walter's words feel heavier. Ethan crossed his arms. Start from the beginning. Walter nodded slowly. 5 years ago this planet was selected for mineral surveys. Nothing exciting. Just routine exploration. Most teams left after the first year. His eyes drifted toward the window. I stayed. Why? Lysara asked. Walter smiled faintly. Someone had to maintain the station. Besides, I liked the quiet. Ethan understood that more than he expected. Some people spent their lives chasing crowds. Others spent their lives escaping them. Walter seemed like the second type. The old man continued. 3 years ago strange traffic started appearing near the system. Unregistered vessels. Hidden routes. Ships that never filed flight plans. Ethan frowned. Smugglers? At first, that was my guess. Walter shook his head. Then I started listening. He pointed toward a communications array visible through the observation room floor. Out here, signals travel a long way. You hear things. Conversations. Warnings. Rumors. Lysara's expression remained calm. And what did you hear? Walter hesitated. For the first time since they met him, uncertainty entered his face. I heard your name. The room became silent. Even the storm outside seemed distant. Ethan looked toward the Queen. Lysara did not react outwardly, but he noticed her hands tighten slightly. Walter set down his mug. At first it sounded ridiculous. Stories usually do. Political conflicts. Noble houses arguing. Trade disputes. Power struggles. His gaze settled on Lysara. Then the rumors became more specific. The Queen spoke quietly. Go on. Walter nodded. People began talking about succession. About influence. About factions inside the Empire. Ethan looked between them. You are saying somebody wanted the throne? I am saying somebody wanted change. Walter's answer came carefully. Too carefully. Lysara turned toward the observation window. Snow raced across the glass. The distant lights continued approaching. Ethan noticed something in her reflection. Not surprise. Recognition. As though she already understood more than she had revealed. Walter noticed it too. You already know, do not you? He asked. For several seconds the Queen said nothing. Then she slowly exhaled. I know my government has not been united for a long time. Ethan looked at her. This was the first time she had spoken openly about her own empire. Lysara kept her eyes on the storm. Many believe strength comes from expansion. More territory. More control. More authority. Her reflection stared back from the glass. I disagree. Walter gave a small nod. That tends to upset powerful people. Ethan finally understood why the old surveyor sounded more sad than afraid. This was not a story about enemies from outside the empire. It was a story about conflict from within. The most dangerous kind. The maintenance robot rolled quietly into the room carrying a tray with 3 cups. Hospitality protocol activated, it announced proudly. Ethan almost laughed despite everything. Walter accepted one of the cups. Thank you, Unit 7. You are welcome, Resident Walter. The machine rolled away. For a brief moment, normal life returned to the room. A heater. Warm drinks. Snow outside. 3 people talking. Then Ethan glanced back toward the horizon. The lights were closer now. Much closer. He could distinguish individual vehicles moving through the storm. Walter followed his gaze. They will reach the station within 2 hours. Do you know who they are? Ethan asked. The old surveyor shook his head. No. Do you know what they want? Walter looked directly at Lysara. I think we all do. The Queen remained silent. Outside, lightning flickered behind distant clouds, briefly illuminating the frozen world. The white landscape flashed silver for an instant before darkness returned. Ethan stared at the approaching convoy. Then he looked at Lysara. For the first time since the crash, he realized something important. The abandoned guards. The missing rescue teams. The strange rumors. The approaching strangers. None of it was random. Somewhere beyond the storm, invisible hands had been moving pieces across a board long before the convoy crashed. And somehow, a human soldier from Earth had walked directly into the middle of the game. The station settled into an uneasy quiet after Walter's revelation. Outside, the storm continued sweeping across the frozen plains, but inside the observation room only the heater and the occasional hum of old machinery disturbed the silence. Ethan stood near the window, watching the convoy lights creep closer through the snow. They seemed larger now. More certain. Every minute shortened the distance between questions and answers. Behind him, Walter returned to organizing papers scattered across a nearby desk. The old surveyor behaved like a man who had spent years preparing for possibilities nobody else believed would arrive. Queen Lysara remained near the glass. Her reflection floated faintly against the darkness outside. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Ethan finally broke the silence. Why did you not tell me? Lysara looked at him. Tell you what? That your own people might be involved. The Queen lowered her eyes briefly. Not in shame. In thought. Because I did not know. Ethan waited. She continued. I suspected. There is a difference. The wind rattled against the reinforced windows. Walter quietly left the room, giving them privacy without announcing it. Even the maintenance robot seemed to understand the moment, rolling away toward another section of the station. For the first time since the crash, Ethan and Lysara found themselves alone. The Queen folded her hands behind her back. When someone spends their life surrounded by ceremony, they stop hearing the truth. Every report is filtered. Every conversation is edited. Every warning arrives softened. She glanced toward the approaching lights. Sometimes a ruler learns last. Ethan understood more than he expected. During his military years he had seen leaders trapped by distance from reality. Good people making poor decisions because nobody around them wanted to deliver unpleasant facts. You think somebody inside your government planned this? He asked. Lysara remained silent for several seconds. I think there are people who believe compassion is weakness. Ethan nodded slowly. He had met plenty of those people. On Earth. In the military. Everywhere. People who mistook kindness for surrender. Patience for fragility. Humanity for inefficiency. The Queen continued quietly. For years I argued for cooperation instead of expansion, diplomacy instead of pressure, investment instead of control. Her violet eyes reflected the distant convoy lights. Not everyone appreciated that approach. Ethan studied her. Until now he had only seen the Queen as a symbol, a title, a responsibility. But standing here, looking out at the storm, she seemed less like a ruler and more like a person carrying the weight of impossible expectations. That sounds lonely. The words escaped before he could stop them. Lysara looked surprised. Then she smiled faintly. You are the first person who has responded that way. Ethan shrugged. Most people see the crown. And you? He glanced toward the approaching lights. I see someone standing in a freezing station while half the galaxy appears to be causing her problems. To his surprise, the Queen laughed softly. Not the careful laugh of diplomacy. A genuine one. Brief but real. The sound lingered in the room. Outside, another wave of snow swept across the landscape. Ethan checked his scanner. The convoy had crossed another ridge. Less than 90 minutes away now. He frowned. Something still bothered him. There is one thing I do not understand. Only one? Lysara asked. I am being generous. That earned another small smile. Ethan continued. If somebody wanted you isolated, why leave witnesses? The Queen's expression slowly changed. The same thought had clearly crossed her mind. Walter returned at that exact moment carrying a metal case. Because they expected none. Ethan turned toward him. Walter placed the case on the table and opened it. Inside sat old communications equipment. Carefully maintained. Functional. Most crash survivors would have followed the evacuation. Walter adjusted a frequency dial. Most people would not stay behind. Ethan glanced toward the Queen. Neither of them needed to say it. He had made a choice back in the valley. A simple one. Stay or leave. Yet somehow that decision had altered everything. Walter activated the receiver. Static filled the room. Then fragments of distant transmissions emerged through the noise. Voices. Coordinates. Navigation updates. Ethan's eyes narrowed. The convoy outside was communicating openly now. Walter listened carefully. Lysara stepped closer. The old surveyor slowly removed his headset. His expression had become noticeably more serious. Well, he said. That answers one question. Ethan immediately looked up. What did you hear? Walter met the Queen's eyes first. Then Ethan's. The storm growled beyond the glass like a living thing. The distant lights continued advancing through the darkness. And Walter spoke the words neither of them wanted to hear. They are not searching for the station. He pointed toward Lysara. They are searching for you. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The words seemed to linger in the warm air of the observation room long after Walter finished speaking. They are searching for you. Outside, the convoy lights continued advancing through the storm. 5 vehicles moving with purpose across an empty world. Ethan stared through the glass. The situation had changed. Before, the approaching strangers had been a mystery. Now they were a destination. Their destination. Walter adjusted the communications receiver and listened to another burst of static. Fragments of voices drifted through the speakers before disappearing again beneath interference. They are being careful, he said quietly. No names. No ranks. No identifying information. Lysara stood motionless beside the window. Her reflection stared back from the dark glass. Calm. Controlled. Royal. Yet Ethan could see the weight behind her eyes. The realization that this was no accident. No misunderstanding. Somebody had planned this. Somebody had expected her to disappear. Ethan finally broke the silence. Do they know we are here? Walter nodded slowly. If they tracked the crash site, eventually they would find the station. There are not many places to hide on this planet. The maintenance robot rolled into the room carrying additional thermal packs. Environmental conditions remain unfavorable. it announced helpfully. Recommendation: avoid outdoor activities. Ethan almost smiled. Good advice. The robot emitted a cheerful tone and rolled away again. For a moment, the simple normality of the machine felt strangely comforting. Then another flash of light appeared beyond the storm. The convoy was getting closer. Much closer. Walter moved toward the main console. The station still has emergency systems. His fingers moved across ancient controls. Screens flickered to life around the room. Security cameras. Structural maps. Power levels. Not many, but enough. Ethan approached. Can we contact anyone? Walter hesitated. Possibly. He opened another window. The station's communications array appeared on the display. Several sections were damaged. Others operated at minimal efficiency. A long-range transmission might work if we can boost the signal. Lysara turned away from the window. Then do it. Walter looked at her carefully. And call whom? The question stopped the room cold. The Queen did not answer immediately. Ethan understood why. Trust had become a complicated thing. Every organization that should have protected her had failed. Every system designed to keep her safe had somehow left her stranded on an ice-covered world. After several moments, Lysara spoke quietly. There are still honorable people within the Empire. Walter nodded. Then let us hope they are listening. He began working. Screens illuminated the room with soft blue light. Antenna diagnostics scrolled across old displays. Power rerouting sequences activated beneath the station. Somewhere deep below, machinery awakened after years of silence. Ethan stepped away and returned to the observation window. Snow continued racing across the frozen landscape. The convoy lights had reached the outer ridges now. Less than an hour away. He felt someone join him. Lysara. Neither spoke for a while. They simply watched the storm together. Finally the Queen broke the silence. You should leave. Ethan looked at her. What? Her gaze remained fixed on the horizon. You are not part of this conflict. Ethan laughed softly. I think that stopped being true several hours ago. I am serious. She turned toward him. Whatever happens next is connected to me. To my position. To my government. Not to you. Ethan studied her expression. She genuinely meant it. Even now, she was trying to protect someone else from consequences aimed at her. The thought struck him harder than he expected. Back in the valley, he said quietly. You asked why I stayed? Lysara remembered. He could see it. Ethan looked back toward the approaching lights. The answer has not changed. The Queen seemed ready to argue. Then she stopped. Because somewhere deep down, she already knew he would not leave. Outside, the storm continued its endless song across the ice. Inside, the station lights glowed warmly against the darkness. Walter suddenly looked up from the communications console. His face had changed. Not fear. Not panic. Hope. I have something. Ethan and Lysara immediately turned. Walter increased the receiver volume. Static crackled through the room. Then a voice emerged from the noise. Weak. Distorted. But unmistakably real. Someone had answered the transmission. Someone out there was listening. Static filled the observation room. The signal faded. Returned. Faded again. Walter adjusted the receiver with careful hands while old circuitry hummed beneath the console. Ethan stood beside him. Queen Lysara remained motionless near the window. Outside, the convoy lights continued their steady advance through the storm. The voice emerged again. Weak. Distorted. But clearer this time. Unidentified station. Repeat, receiving emergency transmission. Walter immediately leaned closer. This is Outpost 17. We have survivors requesting assistance. More static answered him. Then silence. Ethan felt his stomach sink. The signal was struggling to survive the weather. The old surveyor adjusted another control. Power levels across the station flickered. Lights dimmed briefly before returning. Somewhere below, generators groaned under the sudden demand. Then the voice returned. Stronger. Outpost 17, identify survivors. Walter looked toward Lysara. The Queen stepped forward. Her silver hair reflected the pale blue glow of the console screens. For a moment Ethan saw not the exhausted traveler from the frozen valley but the ruler of an interstellar empire. Calm. Steady. Certain. This is Queen Lysara of the Aurelian Empire. Silence followed. Long enough to become uncomfortable. Then the voice answered. Your Majesty. Relief crossed Walter's face. Someone recognized her. Someone believed her. The transmission continued. We have been searching for your signal. Ethan immediately noticed the Queen's expression change. Not relief. Suspicion. Identify yourself. Another burst of interference crackled through the speakers. Then a name emerged. Admiral Corvin. 7th Fleet. Lysara exchanged a glance with Walter. Ethan saw it instantly. Something was wrong. You know him? Ethan asked quietly. The Queen nodded slowly. Yes. Her voice remained neutral. Too neutral. He commands one of our outer defense fleets. Walter folded his arms. Do you trust him? The question hung in the room. Lysara did not answer immediately. Outside, the convoy lights moved closer. 50 minutes away now. Perhaps less. Finally she spoke. I trust the oath he swore. Ethan noticed she had not said she trusted the man. The transmission crackled again. Your Majesty, we are diverting vessels immediately. Estimated arrival, 9 hours. Walter grimaced. 9 hours might as well have been 9 days. The convoy would arrive long before then. Lysara understood it too. Admiral, she said, we have unidentified units approaching our position now. Static. Then a sharp response. Leave immediately. The room went silent. Ethan frowned. What? The Admiral's voice grew urgent. Your Majesty, you must leave the station. Do not remain there. Walter looked confused. Why? Another pause. Then the answer arrived. Because the convoy approaching your position is not operating under official authority. Ethan felt the room grow colder. Lysara stepped closer to the receiver. Who are they? The transmission weakened again. Words dissolved into static. Fragments remained. Internal faction, unauthorized operation, council members. Then silence. Complete silence. Walter adjusted controls rapidly. Nothing returned. The signal had vanished. Ethan stared at the dead receiver. The storm had swallowed the connection. No further messages came. No additional explanations. Only questions remained. Walter slowly removed his headset. That confirms it. Ethan nodded. Someone inside the Empire. Lysara looked toward the storm beyond the window. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass. Older somehow. More tired. Not someone, she said quietly. Several people. The convoy lights emerged briefly through a gap in the snowfall. They were close enough now to distinguish shapes. Large transport vehicles. Organized. Coordinated. Purposeful. Ethan checked his scanner. 40 minutes? Maybe less. Walter moved toward another console. There may be a secondary communications array buried beneath the station. If I can activate it, perhaps we can re-establish contact. Ethan nodded. Do it. The old surveyor disappeared down the corridor. The maintenance robot followed behind him with surprising determination. Their footsteps faded into the distance. Soon only Ethan and Lysara remained inside the observation room. The storm continued scratching against the windows. Neither spoke for several moments. Then the Queen quietly asked, Do you regret staying? Ethan looked at her. The question sounded genuine. Not political. Not royal. Personal. He thought about the frozen valley. The abandoned convoy. The impossible choices. The approaching danger. Then he shook his head. No. Lasara studied him carefully. Most people would. Ethan smiled faintly. Most people are smarter than me. To his surprise, she laughed. Softly. Warmly. The sound lingered between them. Then her expression grew serious once more. You still have time to leave. Ethan walked to the window and stood beside her. Together they watched the distant lights crossing the snow. I think that opportunity passed a long time ago. Outside, the convoy reached the final ridge before the station. For the first time, their lights stopped moving. They simply waited there in the storm, watching, as if whoever commanded them knew exactly where the Queen was, and was willing to be patient.